KirTop here, and these are the 100 most terrible discoveries found during excavations. The Great Flood, myth or catastrophe? The story of the Great Flood is one of the most universal in world culture. It is known not only from the Bible, where Noah builds an ark, but also from the Sumerian epic about Ziusudra, the Babylonian story of Utnapishtim, the Indian myth of Manu, the Greek story of Deucalion, Chinese chronicles, legends of the American Indians, and even Arctic tales. Such a coincidence is almost impossible to consider accidental. This makes you wonder, maybe the flood really happened, and if so, when? One of the most convincing hypotheses suggests an event about 7,600 years ago. Then, due to a sharp rise in the level of the world ocean, salt water gushed through the Bosphorus into the Black Sea lowland. Geologists claim that the water level rose by 140 meters, flooding huge territories. What used to be fertile land became a sea. This event could really look like the end of the world for the peoples of that era. But was it a global flood? Probably not. However, for specific people living in river floodplains, in lowlands, near the coasts, this was a global catastrophe. Imagine, water takes everything. A house, cattle, land, village, ancestors. People save themselves on rafts, go to the mountains. Centuries later, the memory of what happened turns into a myth, universal and terrible. It amazes me how this ancient fear still lives in us. Even in the 21st century, we are afraid of floods. Talk about a climate catastrophe, as if we genetically remember how the world once really drowned. And perhaps this is not just a myth, it is a warning. Discovery rewrites alcohol history. The process of distilling alcohol goes back much further than previously thought. New excavations at the tomb of Liu He, the 9th emperor of the Western Han dynasty, have revealed that distillation was already known in China 2,000 years ago. Scientists have found a bronze vessel called a heavenly pot, which served as a key part of a wine distillation device. Previously, historical texts only pointed to the emergence of such technologies during the Yuan dynasty, that is, 1,000 years later. Despite his short reign, Liu He left behind an impressive legacy. In addition to the distiller itself, the oldest painting of Confucius was found in his tomb, as well as thousands of pieces of armor made of iron, copper, and lacquered leather. All this testifies to the high level of craftsmanship of the Western Han era. An experiment with a replica of the bronze vessel showed a distillation efficiency of over 70% while preserving the taste and aroma of the drink. Initially thought to have been used for perfume essences or medicine, it is now clear that its primary purpose was alcohol production. The findings provide insight into the evolution of brewing and alcohol practices, complementing historical records and revealing the potential of early Chinese inventors. A book with human hair. When you hear the phrase, a book made of human hair, the first thing that comes to mind is fiction, something from a cheap horror movie. But then you see a photo, and you stop smiling. These books really exist. France, 14th to 15th century. Medieval monasteries where manuscripts were bound into booklets, sewn from something that at first looked like skin. And then you realize it's hair. Real, long, light, human. For a long time, scientists could not explain why this was necessary. Only recently have more or less clear hypotheses appeared. It turned out that the hair did not just end up there by accident. It was sewn in deliberately, as a material and as a symbol. Perhaps these were reliquaries, personal items. Someone left a strand of hair in the book in memory of the dead, or on the contrary, as a vow, as part of repentance, or perhaps as an element of protection. Hair was considered to be the carriers of the soul. In one case, it was about a book of prayers, where between the pages there was not one strand, but a whole layer of hair, dense, sewn with the text. And for someone, this book could be the only connection with a dead person, or with themselves. Now imagine, you are in a library pulling out an old volume, and it is alive. Not in a figurative sense, for real, when knowledge and memory are fastened not with ink, but with a person. Oxfordshire mirror. Mirrors are common objects these days, but in ancient times they were considered magical artifacts. This is a bronze Celtic mirror found in Didcot, England. It was created in the 1st century BC and is one of only 18 such finds that have survived to this day. In the Iron Age, such objects were incredibly rare and belonged only to a select few, perhaps priests or noble women. But what was it used for? For beauty, rituals, or perhaps to communicate with the other world. In ancient cultures, mirrors were often considered portals to the other world, and perhaps this mirror also played a role in shamanic rituals. Decorated with exquisite patterns, this artifact remains one of Britain's most mysterious finds. Its true purpose is lost to time, but who knows? Maybe it really did hold something more than just a reflection. The Giants of Easter Island. Easter Island is a tiny speck of land in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, but it is there that hundreds of stone giants, the moai, stand. Their faces are turned inward, as if they were guarding the island. The largest ones reach 10 meters in height and weigh up to 80 tons. And most importantly, no one knows exactly how they were made or why. It is believed that the moai were carved by local people, the Rapa Nui, around the 11th to 16th centuries. They used stone axes, wooden levers, and ropes. Some scientists have tried to repeat this process, and they even succeeded, but only with relatively small statues. What to do with those that weighed tens of tons? How were they moved around the island, given that there are no trees for strong logs on Easter Island? Thor Heyerdahl suggested that the statues were dragged lying down. Another theory says that they were swinged from side to side like a refrigerator on ropes. But there are still questions here, especially about how the statues were given hats, pukao, which weigh up to 2 tons and stand on top. It is almost impossible to lift them without cranes. There is another question: why? Some believe that these were portraits of ancestors. Some that the moai symbolized the strength of the clan. But the island is small. There were almost no resources on it. Why did the entire population spend energy on these stone heads? A lonely island, without trees, without iron, with mysterious statues that seem to be watching you. I can't help but think that this was a ritual not for people, but for someone who was supposed to see these statues from the sky or from the sea. Traces of opium 3,500 years old. A sensational statement was made by archaeologists in Israel. Bronze Age people who lived in the Levant took psychoactive substances. In 2017, during excavations in the tombs of Tel Yehud, archaeologists unearthed pottery, but analyses were carried out only this year. The study of such excavations is very similar to a forensic medical examination at a crime scene. The analysis of 22 clay objects took place on equipment used by the police. People who took opium in the Bronze Age would never have thought they would be studied by cops from the 21st century. Analysis of gas chromatography and mass spectrometry carried out as part of the study showed that 8 vessels contained opium alkaloids obtained from the poppy plant. The jars contained morphinin, which is derived from morphine, as well as opianic acid and other compounds in the chemical signature of opium. Based on this, we can conclude that the ancient Canaanites were familiar with the psychoactive properties of the poppy. The ancient Egyptians could use opium as an offering to the underworld, or priests used it to evoke the spirits of dead relatives. Back in the 1960s, for the first time, experts suggested that such jugs were used to make opium. Their long necks resembled an inverted poppy head. The first written mention of opium was on 3,000-year-old Sumerian clay tablets, where the drug is referred to as gil, which means happiness. This is not the first find confirming that people used drugs in ancient times. Archaeologists have repeatedly found traces of marijuana, which was most likely used for religious rituals. Ancient tiny people in Taiwan. Taiwan is a very interesting island located 130 to 220 kilometers east of China. The history of Taiwan's indigenous Austronesians goes back 5,000 years. But according to the legends and stories of local residents in the villages before the Austronesians, another equally interesting civilization lived here. They are often referred to as pygmies, or tiny people. They had dark skin and curly hair, and their most distinguishing feature was, as you might have guessed, their tiny stature. All information about them was based only on fables and legends, but recently a very important event happened. In early October of this year, scientists proved the existence of tiny humans in Taiwan. The journal World Archaeology published an article claiming that archaeologists in a cave in southeastern Taiwan have found the remains of ancient people who belonged to Negritos. This ethnic group still lives in the Philippines, the Malay Peninsula, and the Andaman Islands. The term Negritos is a direct Spanish translation meaning little black and is the widely accepted scientific and historical name for this ethnic group. The Negritos are the first descendants of the first people of Sundaland. For scientists, the study of these remains is very important since these people most likely migrated from Africa. After conducting research, scientists determined that the possible height of tiny people was 139 centimeters. The first people arrived on the island 30,000 years ago when there was a land corridor between mainland China and Taiwan. But 10,000 years ago, the corridor went underwater. The legend of the Negrito people in Taiwan is quite interesting. Of the ethnic groups, about half of the Austronesians saw the Negritos as enemies, while the other half saw them as allies, neutrals or ancestors. However, one ethnic group, the Sai-Siat, had a surprisingly difficult relationship with the Negritos. The Sai-Siats, a small population that still exists in Taiwan, have a tradition called pastai, a ritual dedicated to honoring short people. As the legend says, ancient Sai-Siats and Little Tai once lived nearby. The Tai taught their neighbors medicine, singing, dancing, and other cultural traditions. However, the Tai men harassed the Sai-Siat women. After that, the Siats became angry and killed almost all the Tai people. After this event, a terrible famine awaited them, and they thought that they were punished by the vengeful spirit of the Pygmies. Since then, they began to conduct the pastai ceremony, in which they ask for forgiveness for the sins of their ancestors. Since then, the tiny people ceased to exist. And long before the existence of the human race, our planet was inhabited by giant monsters, and a little boy found a tooth of one such giant on the shore. A child with a padlock on his leg. Poland, the village of Penn, 17th century. Archaeologists are exploring an abandoned cemetery and find a child's skeleton. Age, about 5 to 7 years. The body is lying face down. There is a massive padlock on the leg. Old iron. Not everyone was buried like this, only those who were feared. Could people really be afraid of a child in ancient times? In popular belief, it was believed that an inverted body would not be able to get up. And the padlock is a kind of magic seal, so that the soul does not leave, does not return, does not harm. Nearby is another famous burial with a dead witch, a woman who had a sickle placed on her neck so that if she tried to get up, she would decapitate herself. This child is most likely part of the same tradition. What caused the Great Migration of Peoples? 4th to 5th centuries A.D., the map of Europe begins to fall apart. Waves of settlers descend on the Roman Empire. Visigoths, Huns, Vandals, Alans, Franks. The great empire, which had maintained order for centuries, collapses before our eyes. What would later be called the Middle Ages begins, and with it, the Age of Fog. What triggered this movement of peoples? The official version is a combination of factors: climate cooling, crop failures, population growth, internal conflicts. New tribes were looking for land, resources, security. But why did it all happen at the same time all over Eurasia? Why did the Germans, Slavs, and steppe dwellers all start moving? What was the trigger? There is a theory that it all started with the Huns, a military people from Central Asia who, like a chain reaction, pushed other tribes to the west. Other researchers believe that it goes deeper. Perhaps an ecological catastrophe occurred in Asia, which caused entire cultures to be uprooted. There is even a suggestion that changes in the Earth's magnetic field could have affected animal migrations, and people followed them. The Romans could not withstand the onslaught. Their roads, walls, and legions could not stop those who came not so much to fight as to survive. The empire disappeared, and another Europe arose in its place, feudal, religious, fragmented. But without this migration, there would be no France, Germany, or Russia. We literally live on the ruins of Rome and on the bones of that ancient storm. There was life on Mars. There is proof. In the 1980s, the CIA conducted experiments with people with psychic abilities. Among them was Joe McMoneagle, known as Remote Viewer #1. He shared his memories on the American Alchemy podcast, telling about secret projects and unusual visions. One day he was given coordinates and asked to describe what he saw. McMoneagle described a giant pyramid, larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza, with huge halls inside. There were creatures inside that looked like people but much taller. They were trapped, surrounded by a hostile atmosphere, and they were slowly dying. Then the instructor showed a white card with the inscription, Mars, 1 million BC. Later, McMoneagle visited NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory to study the negatives of the photographs. He found strange structures and bones on them. In his opinion, there was once a civilization on Mars, but a huge space object deprived the planet of its atmosphere, leading to its destruction. McMoneagle also participated in the CIA's Stargate project, where psychics were trained to penetrate the minds of enemies. In 2017, a document called Exploring Mars was declassified, which described his visions in detail. The report indicated the exact coordinates: 40.89 degrees north latitude, 9.55 degrees west longitude. McMoneagle saw Martians in unusual clothing, a raging storm, and giant pyramids used as shelters. He described the rooms inside the pyramid as minimalist, designed for sleep or hibernation. The Martians were waiting for help, but there was no salvation. The psychic was sure that he was describing Earth. When he learned that it was Mars, he became angry since he could not verify the veracity of his visions. McMoneagle asked NASA for images of the coordinates he had been given. They did indeed show a strange structure near the crater. He claimed that if the pyramid had existed before the impact, it would have been destroyed by the collision. Moreover, according to him, when NASA first recorded the structure, it was glowing red. Although such experiments remain controversial, their existence is officially documented. The mystery of the ancient civilization on Mars remains open. Gladiator and the Lion. In Britain, on the territory of an ancient Roman settlement, archaeologists have discovered a human skeleton with unusual injuries. A man, about 20 to 25 years old, and the cause of death is bite marks that leave no doubt. He was torn to pieces by a large predator, and most likely a lion. The wounds were characteristic. Deep punctures from fangs on the thighs, ruptures in soft tissue, claw marks. This is not a hunt, not an attack in the wild. By all accounts, the man died in the arena. He was a gladiator, and he was released against an animal against which he had no chance. Such things are rare. Usually only scraps of information remain from gladiators, inscriptions, stories, images. And here is the man himself. His bones, his last fight. Everything that can be restored has been restored. Height, age, probable nationality, but the name is unknown. No plaque, no sign, only the body that speaks for itself. The oldest shipyard. Underwater archaeologists from the Maritime Archaeology Trust never cease to delight us with new finds. This time they managed to find what is probably the oldest shipyard in the world. According to preliminary estimates, it is 8,000 years old. Off the coast of the Isle of Wight, deep underwater, archaeologists have found a man-made wooden shipyard that was built by Stone Age people. This shipyard did not build yachts or aircraft carriers. Stone Age people built fishing boats on it. Previously, the age of the oldest shipyard was 5,500 years old, and this shipyard used technologies from the future, so to speak. This confirms the fact that either people in antiquity had much more knowledge than we think, or modern dating methods do not work from the word at all. The oldest shipyard used advanced wood processing technology. Therefore, this object is very important for maritime archaeology and understanding the development of our civilization. The shipyard was discovered at a depth of 11 meters, and 8,000 years ago there was dry land and the area was covered with vegetation. In fact, the shipyard was discovered back in 2005, but only now has technology made it possible to create a three-dimensional model of this structure for further study. It's hard to imagine, but it's a fact. People in the Stone Age built boats using their own shipyard for this. This is what kind of technology and knowledge people had in antiquity. I am sure that before it would be very difficult for them to move from the Isle of Wight to the island of Taiwan, and we can do it in a matter of seconds. Where did the Neanderthals go? They lived in Europe and Asia long before us. Strong, hardy, well adapted to the cold. We are used to thinking that Neanderthals were some kind of dumb cavemen, but this is not true at all. They had a larger brain than us. They made tools, used fire, buried the dead, took care of the wounded. There is evidence that they played primitive flutes and decorated themselves with shells. Neanderthals were not animals. They were a full-fledged human species, almost like us. But about 40,000 years ago, they disappeared, and it is still unclear why. There are three main versions. Assimilation, they mixed with the Cro-Magnons, and now part of their genes lives in us. Genocide, our ancestors destroyed them in the fight for resources. And the climate, a sharp cold snap began, which the Neanderthals could not cope with because they did not make clothes and did not build houses. Most likely, everything at once. Some died, some disappeared into us. To this day, our genome contains from 1% to 4% of Neanderthal DNA, especially in Europeans and Asians. But what does this mean? Memory or oblivion? One thing touches me in this story. They were almost like us, but something prevented them from surviving. Golden coins hidden in the wall. In the wall of the Natural Reserve on the Golan Heights, archaeologists have discovered a treasure trove of gold coins. What is unique about this find, you may ask? I will tell you, it's the fact that this territory during the Six-Day War in 1967 was annexed by Israel from Syria. These coins may shed light on ancient Muslim conquests in the region. 44 pure gold coins were found. All coins had images of the emperors Phocas and Heraclius. The wall was built in 635 AD. In this year, the Muslims took control of this territory, although earlier there was a Christian settlement here. The Byzantine Empire, the eastern part of the Roman Empire, was in fact the longest-running medieval empire, lasting over 1,000 years. The place where the coins were found, known in the Christian world as Banias. It was significant because it was supposedly here that Jesus said to Peter, "Upon this rock I will build my church." Coins confirm the fact that numerous military conflicts took place in this territory. The territory was important for Christians, Jews, and Muslims alike. In 410 AD, after the fall of Rome and the invasion of the barbarians, the Byzantine Empire began to flourish. We are unlikely to be able to find out who the owner of the gold coins was and why he hid them in the wall. But perhaps we will be able to restore the historical justice that thousands of archaeologists around the world are striving for. The rarest mosaic in Syria. Archaeologists have managed to find an ancient mosaic that depicts the Trojan War. This find is about 1,600 years old and very well preserved, founded in northern Syria. Nothing like it had been found before. On the mosaic, you can see the battle of ancient Greek warriors and Amazons under the walls of Troy. You can even see the names of the commanders who were armed with swords and shields. Most likely, they were famous warriors of those times. The area of this work of art is 120 square meters, and it adorned the floor of an ancient Roman bath. The Trojan War took place between the ancient Greeks and the inhabitants of Troy around the 12th or 13th century BC. The uniqueness of this mosaic lies in the depiction of Amazon women who fought on the side of Troy. The Amazons were a race of female warriors in Greek mythology. In ancient Greek and Roman mythology, the demigod hero Heracles killed Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, in one of his 12 labors. The Trojan battle lasted 10 years. Looking back, 10 years doesn't seem like a lot of time, but if you bring that figure to our time, it sends shivers all over your body. But back to history. For 9 years, the Greeks destroyed the nearby cities and villages, but the city of Troy itself was too tough for them. This was a fortress that could not be captured. But the Greeks came up with a trick that everyone knows about in our time. The most interesting thing is that not the slightest wooden pieces of this giant horse have been found so far. Therefore, for now, the story of the Trojan horse can be considered a legend. Representatives of the Nabu Museum hope that excavations in ancient Rastan will continue. According to them, the city is full of heritage monuments and artifacts. No serious archaeological excavations have been carried out in this place yet, so we can only guess how many more amazing finds await us in the future. Headless pit. In Slovakia, archaeologists have unearthed a burial site over 7,000 years old, almost 40 bodies, and all but one have no skulls. The bodies are neatly laid out, no signs of violence or chaos. Everything is too calm, as if someone knew what they were doing and did it according to a pattern. Only one child's head has been preserved. No one understands why. Either they spared him, or on the contrary, they left him as a sign. There are versions: a ritual, an execution, or an attempt to erase a person so that not even his image remains. The Templars' treasures. The Templars were not just knights, they were a financial empire of the Middle Ages. They had castles, ships, a treasury, their own banks, and even their own transfer system. The French King Philip IV owed them a huge sum. And then suddenly, he outlawed the order. They were arrested, tried, tortured, and most importantly, their treasures disappeared. Officially, nothing valuable was found during the seizure of the Templars' Paris headquarters. No gold, no artifacts, no documents. The treasury was empty. This caused panic and a lot of rumors. How so? Where is everything? They said that a few hours before the raid, a caravan left Paris and delivered the gold to the port of La Rochelle. From there, by ship, to an unknown destination. Since then, one of the most persistent historical quests begins: find the Templars' gold. Some are looking for it in Scotland, others on Oak Island in Canada, where an ingenious cache with traps was allegedly built. Some believe that the treasure was transported to Switzerland and became the basis of the future banking system. There is even a theory that the gold was hidden in Jerusalem and is still guarded. The fact is that we do not even know the approximate amount of the loss. Given the scale of the order, it could have been thousands of kilograms of gold, relics, documents, political secrets. All this disappeared in an instant, and there are no traces. Personally, it seems to me that this is not just a story about treasures. This is a story about a force that became too independent and was destroyed. And the gold, it went along with the influence. And maybe it still works, only in other hands. The Chinese have tried an ancient drink. A tightly sealed bronze vessel was found in an ancient tomb in the Chinese province of Shanxi. Researchers found about 300 milliliters of liquid in it, which is the remains of a fermented alcoholic drink that is about 2,300 years old. Two people who tried this liquid noted its metallic taste. People learned to make fermented drinks in ancient times. The earliest evidence of this was found in the Rockefet Cave in Israel, where beer was made from cereals about 13,000 years ago. In the Neolithic era, alcoholic drinks began to be produced in the Middle East and China using millet and rice. In a bronze vessel 30.4 centimeters high and 21.6 centimeters in diameter, they found 300 milliliters of clear liquid, or rather a fermented alcoholic drink that was used as a funeral offering. The researchers found 4 types of starch granules in the liquid: millet, foxtail millet, Job's tears, legumes, wheat, barley, and rice. They also identified organisms involved in fermentation, including Aspergillus molds and baker's yeast. The scientists believe the drink resembled modern yellow wine, Huangju. Thousands of archaeologists demand justice. Egyptian Prime Minister Mostafa Madbouli and archaeologists are trying to get the Rosetta Stone and 16 other artifacts back to Egypt. I fully support them, because the history of ancient Egypt must belong to modern Egypt. The Prime Minister believes that the artifacts were taken out of the country in an illegal and unethical way. He created a petition that has already collected more than 2,500 signatures. Previously, the Egyptian government asked the UK to return the artifacts to their homeland, but now they are already demanding it. Mostafa Madbouli claims that the Rosetta Stone and other artifacts will be repatriated. It's only a matter of time. As you can see, global events are taking place even in the world of archaeology, which could not even be thought of before. The Rosetta Stone was discovered in 1799, a year after Napoleon's invasion of Egypt, by a French officer supervising excavations in the city of Rashid in the Nile Delta. The stone contained text in 3 different languages: Greek, Demotic, and Egyptian hieroglyphs. This object was seen as a cross-cultural translation key that could provide unparalleled insight into ancient civilizations. The text of the petition is as follows: "The confiscation of the Rosetta Stone, among other artifacts, is an act of encroachment on Egyptian cultural values and identity and is a direct result of the cultural colonial violence against the Egyptian cultural heritage. History cannot be changed, but it can be corrected. And although the political, military, and state rule of the British Empire left Egypt many years ago, cultural colonization has not yet ended." Interestingly, Egypt is not the only country that requires the UK to return their artifacts. So Greece demands the return of the Parthenon marble to its homeland. But current British Prime Minister Liz Truss does not support the wishes of archaeologists from around the world. After all, she is well aware that the popularity of British museums will decrease significantly. Have you ever thought about the fact that the ruler of the state was a man without a face? And even this has already happened in our history. Picasso dish. An ordinary second-hand shop in Belgium, a shelf with dishes, dusty plates, cups, old glass, and suddenly, a ceramic dish. Not very beautiful, it looks handmade. On the back, an inscription, Empreinte originale de Picasso. At first they thought it was a joke or a replica, but they decided to check. And the examination confirmed it was an original, a genuine work by Pablo Picasso. 1953, one of the serial but still rare ceramic prints that he made in France. How it ended up in a secondhand shop is unknown. Perhaps it was lost, forgotten, thrown away. Perhaps someone did not know what exactly they were holding in their hands. Or they knew, but no longer attached any importance to it. The dish was sold at auction for 12,600 euros. But the amount is not the main thing. The main thing is the effect. It's like finding an autograph in an old textbook, or the original letter in a box of waste paper. Such finds always confuse, because they destroy the main myth. That value is where it is expected. Sometimes art lies on a shelf among the trash, and waits, for decades, until someone takes a closer look. Forgotten rulers of Egypt. Most of us think of Egypt as an eternal civilization, strong, proud, independent. But there was a time when it was ruled by outsiders. They were called the Hyksos. This word means rulers of foreign lands or shepherd kings. Who they really were is still a matter of debate. The Hyksos invaded Egypt around the 17th century BC, and they didn't just destroy the country, they subjugated it. They founded a dynasty, ruled for almost a century, and introduced new technologies. They are believed to have brought the war chariot to Egypt. This changed the entire strategy of warfare in the Middle East. There is also evidence that the Hyksos were the first to actively use bronze and composite weapons on Egyptian territory. Where they came from is a mystery. Some believe that they came from Canaan, modern Levant. Others, that they were nomadic tribes from Asia. Some researchers suggest that the Hyksos were a mixture of different peoples, traders, warriors, herders, who united on a wave of migrations and wars. But their culture did not survive in its pure form. We know about them mainly from Egyptian sources, and therefore with a strong tinge of hostility. After the expulsion of the Hyksos, the Egyptians began a new era, the 18th dynasty, the same one in which Tutankhamun was. Perhaps it was hatred for the enslavers that made Egypt become a great power again. But at the same time, some of the Hyksos' achievements were preserved and became part of the Egyptian tradition. I am always captivated by such moments when the victors not only forget the vanquished but also take the best from them. Sacrifice under the pyramid. At Shimao, an ancient Bronze Age fortified settlement located along the Great Wall of China, archaeologists have discovered astonishing evidence of ancient rituals. 6 pits filled with skulls were found beneath a step pyramid at the center of the settlement. These ritual pits contained the remains of approximately 80 young girls, indicating human sacrifice. Sacrifices were indeed common in ancient China and were carried out for a variety of reasons. For example, as offerings to the Hebo river god or as part of burial rituals where slaves or concubines were sent to the afterlife with their masters. However, the exact purpose of the Shimao girls' sacrifices remains a mystery to scholars. The tomb that no one was looking for. In Saqqara, right next to the Pyramid of Userkaf, they found a small tomb. It was squeezed between other buildings. No paintings, no bas-reliefs, just a limestone sarcophagus, a few vessels, and a tablet with a name. According to the inscription, it is the pharaoh's son, but everything around says otherwise. The burial is not marked, it is not visible from the outside, and even the workers who have been digging here for decades have never heard of it. It feels like he was not just buried, but crossed out, as if something went wrong, as if he died at the wrong time, for the wrong reasons, or was not who he should have been. No clear traces, but the very lack of attention is the trace, and such finds are remembered not for what lies in them, but for the fact that they were tried to be ignored. Ritual during a change of power. Archaeological excavations at the site of Ucanal in northern Guatemala have uncovered traces of an ancient ritual that may have symbolized the public change of the old regime of the Mayan civilization. At the top of the pyramid temple, charred human bones and royal jewelry were found. These artifacts may indicate specific burial rites or ceremonies. The analysis showed that the bones belonged to at least 4 adults, with 3 of them identified as males. One of the skeletons was exposed to high temperatures of over 800 degrees Celsius. This research confirms that the remains found may have been members of the royal family, originally buried elsewhere and burned as part of a ritual transfer to the pyramid a century later. Among the items found were 1,500 fragments of various jewelry, pendants, beads, plates, and mosaics made of green stone, obsidian objects, blades, 10,000 beads from seashells, as well as pendants made from mammal teeth. Fragments of a mosaic funerary mask made of green stone were also discovered, which is typical of royal tombs of the period. Radiocarbon dating indicates that the deaths occurred approximately 100 years before the burning. This supports the theory that the burial may have been part of a ritual marking the symbolic and literal destruction of the previous dynastic line of Canwitznel. This may have been a highly ceremonial event associated with a change in the political order of the region. The disappearance of Atlantis. Atlantis is more than just an ancient legend. It is a cultural phantom that still influences minds, dreams, and even science. Plato described it in astonishing detail. A huge island with a highly developed civilization, a powerful army, and a complex system of canals. He claimed that Atlantis was located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, opposite the Atlantean Mountains, and sank underwater as a result of a powerful earthquake in one day, around 9,500 BC. More than 11,000 years have passed since then, and we are still arguing. Did it exist? They searched for it in Crete and Santorini, Cuba and Brazil, Iceland, and at the bottom of the Atlantic. Scientists have proposed hundreds of theories, from the catastrophe at Tyre to a distorted memory of a sunken part of the Sahara. The problem is that we do not have a single direct archaeological proof. No artifacts, no remains, no genetic trace, but science cannot completely disprove the existence of Atlantis. The strangest thing is the scale of its influence. The legend of Atlantis has given rise to entire schools of philosophy, occult theories, Nazi mystics, pseudosciences, conspiracy theorists, and science fiction writers have been based on it. Atlantis has become a symbol of a lost golden age. It attracts because it is not just a vanished land, it is the idea that we were once more than we are now. Sometimes I think that Atlantis is not a sunken island, but a reflection of our dreams. We want to believe that people were once stronger, smarter, better. And until we learn the truth, this story will come up again and again. The king without a face. No matter what anyone says, being a king is not an easy job, especially if you are the king of Jerusalem and your country is constantly besieged by Muslims, and your main enemy is the strongest ruler of those times, Saladin. And what if we add to this the terrible disease of leprosy, which does not allow to live normally? This is the suffering that few people could cope with. But the hero of our video accepted all these challenges. Modern historians admire him for his willpower and devotion to the country. King without a face, leper king. All this is King Baldwin IV. An interesting fact is that scientists have finally found out which disease was the very first in the history of mankind. The oldest disease that is also mentioned in the Bible was leprosy, and now it is completely curable, even though it was different before. At one time, it was considered a curse for sins. At another time, divine grace. People have had leprosy since the time of migration from Africa to Europe. Let's go back to the king. With his main enemy, Sultan Saladin, Baldwin had to face in the first year of his reign. The 13-year-old king successfully attacked Damascus, which forced Saladin to get out of Aleppo. 2 years later, the opponents clashed in the battles for Damascus and Andujar. The army of Saladin outnumbered the troops of the Kingdom of Jerusalem by several times. In addition, Baldwin could hold the horse's reins with only one hand. But this did not prevent the king from crushingly defeating his opponent in 1177 at the Battle of Montgizar. The stunned Saladin in his heart said to his associates, "As long as this boy is in Jerusalem, the city will not fall." Baldwin at that time was only 16 years old. The opponent had to negotiate peace. At the age of 24, Baldwin could no longer walk without support. Due to the inability to blink, his cornea dried up and he became blind. Plus, he survived a very dangerous fever that aggravated the disease. Realizing the approach of death, Baldwin appointed his 6-year-old nephew as his heir. In fact, King Baldwin IV never wore a mask, as shown in various films. Yes, his face was indeed disfigured by leprosy, but until the last day of his life, he continued to lead the state and fight off the army of Saladin. Saladin took the city 2 years after Baldwin's death. The history of the Kingdom of Jerusalem ended, but the history of ancient Egypt did not end, which I will tell you about later. Thousands of strange holes in Peru. On the territory of Peru, archaeologists find hundreds and even thousands of artifacts and various finds that defy explanation. I will be honest, many of these finds are fakes, and the creators of these finds simply make money on gullible people. In the Pisco Valley, archaeologists have discovered thousands of holes. The Peruvians themselves call them differently, Monte Sierpe, which means snake mountain, and Cheroviruela, which literally translates as Smallpox Hill or simply a strip of holes. But the most unusual names came up on the net. They are called an incubator for alien eggs. These pits are located in a very inaccessible place, so there are few scientists who are able to visit here. From this, it is still impossible to explain the origin of holes. They were first seen flying by plane in the 30s of the last century. In the 50s, the first expedition of scientists set off here, which managed to calculate the size and number of holes. The strip of holes stretched for 1.5 kilometers, and the width of the strip was from 14 to 20 meters. But the number of holes shocked the researchers. There were more than 5,000 of them. The first idea that scientists came up with was an ancient mass grave. That is why there are more questions. Pits from 0.5 meter to 1 meter deep. Nearby, there are no traces of a person. Artifacts of ancient civilizations, nothing at all that could give at least some clue to explain this place. Archaeologists have different theories about the origin of the pits, but most of them are pseudo-scientific. One thing is known for sure, that these pits are at least hundreds of years old, and most likely they were created by people. You can write in the comments your assumptions for what they could be used in the past. Bones in the wall. At first I thought it was a fake. Seriously, who would find bones in their own wall these days? But the story is real. England. A woman is renovating her home. She opens the wall, and there, among the old plaster and bricks, are real human bones. A skull, vertebrae. The police arrive and confirm that these are indeed human remains. Real ones. Around the 19th century, but the exact age has not yet been determined. And that's where it gets a little uncomfortable, because you realize that between ordinary life and death, there is literally a layer of wallpaper. Everything we use to consider the past is no longer somewhere underground. It's nearby, inside the house. I don't know how these bones ended up in the wall. Maybe it was a crime, maybe it was an old buried ritual, but the fact remains, in a real house where someone slept, ate, and lived, there were human remains behind the wall. The plague and its route. 14th century. Europe freezes in horror. The Black Death is rapidly spreading across cities and villages. People are dying in the thousands. Doctors put on masks with beaks. Families disappear in a few days. And most importantly, no one understands what is happening. Today we know it was the plague. But even with modern knowledge, questions remain. Why did it strike almost exactly along the same routes as Justinian's pandemic 1,000 years earlier? Why did outbreaks occur almost simultaneously in London, Moscow, Paris? How could the plague move so quickly, given that the speed of movement in the Middle Ages was extremely low? The culprit is usually considered to be the black rat flea. It carried the bacterium Yersinia pestis, but the range of wild rats did not cover the entire northern Europe. And most importantly, these rodents, in theory, could not appear in dozens of cities at once. Some scientists even believe that it was not the rats that were the problem, but the air, climate change, humidity, dust waves that could carry the infection. There is also a theory that the disease was transmitted faster, not because of biology, but because of psychology. Panic, mass exodus, flight. Infected people moved to new places, not even knowing that they were bringing death with them. As a result, the epidemic behaved not like a wave, but like a network. It ignited in many places at once, like outbreaks on dry grass. What scares me about this story is not so much the disease itself, but how it repeats itself. We think that everything has changed since then. Medicine, hygiene, science. But pandemics still outpace common sense. Perhaps this is not only about microbes, perhaps it is a mirror of society. The more connections, the more vulnerable the system. And every time we begin to forget, something comes that reminds us again. The past is closer than it seems. Burial costumes of the Han Dynasty. In ancient times in China, high-ranking people were buried in unique suits made of jade plates fastened with gold wire. The cold and smooth plates created an incredibly beautiful mosaic that symbolized the wealth of the Han Dynasty. Similar burials except China were not seen anywhere else. In Chinese, they are called Yu-Yi, meaning jade suit. For centuries, people thought jade burial suits were just a legend. People could not even imagine that the rulers in those days could be so rich as to completely cover their bodies with incredibly expensive jade. But the discovery in 1986 confirmed that these were not the legends described in the old texts. This discovery became a sensation not only for China, but for the whole world. Finally, archaeologists were able to confirm that the rulers of the Han Dynasty were buried in jade suits. The Han Dynasty was extremely powerful and ruled from 206 BC to 220 AD. This is one of the most iconic Chinese dynasties. The Han remain the main ethnic group in China today. The tombs of the Han Dynasty rulers changed the idea of Chinese burial practices. In 1983, in Dingxian, Hebei Province, researchers discovered one of the most expensive jade suits in history, which belonged to the ruler of Huai. The costume is made of 1,203 pieces of jade connected with gold threads, the total weight of which is 2,580 grams. The most complex costume consisted of 2,498 pieces of jade. Bloody footprints of Kyoto castles. There is one strange detail in Japanese castles of the 16th century that tourists rarely notice. On some wooden floors, there are dark stains, not paint, not drawings. These are real imprints of human bodies left after samurai committed suicide, and they are still visible. Such traces remained, for example, in Fushimi Castle near Kyoto. In 1600, during one of the sieges, several dozen samurai committed suicide to avoid being captured. The blood was absorbed into the wood, and then the panels on which their silhouettes remained were removed and transferred to other temples as a tribute to the fallen. Now they are called Yurei Ita, cursed boards. But formally there is no mysticism, just memory, literally absorbed into the floor. In the photographs, you can see how the outlines of bodies are imprinted on the floor, the contours of hands, heads, hips. It was as if people had laid down and disappeared, leaving only a shadow behind them. A unique find of a young paleontologist. Just like that, you can come with your family to South Carolina, go to the beach and find something very ancient that makes you shudder. A little boy of 8 years old walking on the beach and digging in the mud found a large fossilized tooth of an ancient shark. Shark tooth is more than 12 centimeters long, which is considered a very large specimen. It's even hard to imagine what this monster looked like 20 million years ago, having more than one such tooth in its mouth, and not even 100. An adult individual of the monster had about 300 teeth in its mouth, and each is about 8 to 15 centimeters in size. And now, in our time, a little boy just holds this tooth in his hands. It causes shock and admiration at the same time. Paleontologists from all over the world have already written their congratulations to the boy because even for specialists, a find of this kind is a rare occurrence. Otodus angustidens is a species of megatooth shark that lived during the Oligocene and Miocene epochs, approximately 33 to 22 million years ago. Sharks have been known to grow to at least 10 meters in length. These sharks are related to the Otodus megalodon, another extinct giant-toothed shark. That is, you understand that there were many such sharks in ancient times, and what prevents them now from swimming deep in the ocean farther from a reasonable person. There is already a lot of information about megalodons on YouTube, but I still remind you that the length of this shark reached 20 meters and the size of the largest living whale is 33 meters. However, whales are not predators, and this creature did not mind eating any living organism on our planet. Let's take a break from teeth for a bit and move to Mexico. Who built the pyramids? They have been standing for over 4,500 years. Hundreds of tons of stone, millions of blocks, perfectly calibrated angles. The majestic, alien-like pyramids of Giza remain a symbol of eternity and mystery. But the main question is simple: how? Modern archaeology offers different versions. According to one, the blocks were cut in quarries and delivered to the construction site using sleds and wet sand. According to another, the blocks were made right on site from a mixture of limestone and clay. Essentially, it was ancient concrete. French engineer Joseph Davidovits even presented his formula for geopolymer stone. And still, even taking these hypotheses into account, we do not have an exact answer. It is not only a matter of technology. The mystery is in the scale. It would have taken about 2.3 million blocks to build the Cheops pyramid. Even with an ideal organization of labor, this would have taken tens of years and thousands of workers. Now remember, this was the ancient world. No wheeled cranes, no steel, no electricity, and yet the internal shafts are aligned to the centimeter and the orientation of the pyramid's sides almost perfectly matches the 4 cardinal directions. And then there are other questions. Why were such tombs needed? Why are all 3 Giza pyramids built at the same angles as the stars of Orion's belt? Why do some blocks show signs of processing that look more like melting than cutting? The more I read about the pyramids, the more I feel these are not just buildings, they are messages. They were not built just for the dead, they were built for the future, for us. And until we understand exactly how they were built, we will not understand why. Church stained glass. Stained glass windows in ancient churches are stunning with their intricate depictions of biblical scenes and vibrant colors. However, there is an interesting and unpleasant secret behind the creation of these works of art. To achieve the desired shades and strength of glass, craftsmen added an unusual ingredient to the mixture: urine and sometimes human blood. During the manufacturing process, metal oxides were mixed with urine, which helped improve the adhesion of the coloring agent to the glass during firing. This method gave the stained glass a special brightness and durability. Thus, in the creation of these beautiful windows, which are hundreds of years old, not only the skilled hands of craftsmen were involved, but also very unexpected materials. Stained glass is not only a symbol of spiritual light and beauty, but also evidence that art sometimes requires unconventional approaches and secret ingredients. A cache of royal regalia. An unexpected discovery in the dungeons of the Vilnius Cathedral shocked historians. A carefully walled-up vault with burial regalia associated with the rulers of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and Poland was discovered. Crowns, scepters, chains, rings, and tablets belonging to King Alexander, his mother Elizabeth of Habsburg, and Barbara Radziwill, the wife of Sigismund Augustus, were found there. These items were not worn during life, but were made specifically for burial ceremonies. According to researchers, the regalia were first discovered in 1931, but with the start of World War II, they were hidden deeper in the catacombs and walled up to protect them from looting. The location of this cache eluded archaeologists for decades until December 2024, when a detailed examination of all the cavities was carried out using an endoscope, comparing archival diagrams with new plans of the cathedral. In the end, the treasure was found. Barbara Radziwill, whose tragic fate became legendary, died shortly after her coronation, which made her burial regalia especially significant for her contemporaries. Lord of the Forest. In the Waipua rainforest in northern New Zealand, there grows a tree that is hard to miss. It is over 50 meters tall. Its diameter is almost 5. It is about 1,500 years old. The locals call it Tain Mahuta. This is the name of the god of the forest and light in Maori myths. According to legend, it was Taini who parted the sky and the earth so that peace could appear between them. But this is not a mythical creature. This is a real tree. Kauri is an ancient species that has survived since the Ice Age. Today, there are very few of them left, and Tain is the largest of them all. A wooden path leads to it. No advertising, no kiosks, no guides with microphones. Everything is quiet. You approach it and at first it seems like just a big tree. But when you linger, you understand the scale, not physically. In time, it grew when there was no writing, no architecture, no maps, and it continues to grow. Tain has survived storms, epidemics, deforestation, oblivion. Now it is protected. The roots are fenced off, treated against fungi. It is old but alive. And this is a bit confusing because we are used to it. Ancient means stone, skull, ruins, and here it is, green, wet, growing, a living past that no one buried. The mystery of Stonehenge. Stonehenge is like a puzzle made of stone. It has been standing on Salisbury Plain for over 4,000 years. The giant stones are arranged in a circle with inner and outer rings. Some of them weigh up to 25 tons. Some were brought from hundreds of kilometers away. How? Why? Who did it? Scientists are still arguing. Some say it was a Druid sanctuary. Others believe that the complex was built long before the Celts arrived, about 1,000 years ago. There is also a theory that it was an ancient observatory. After all, certain stones are indeed aligned in the direction of the solstices, but even if this is true, why was such a scale needed? The problem is that we have almost no written sources from that time. We can only guess. But one thing is definitely amazing: the engineering precision. The stones stood vertically, overlapped by horizontal blocks, creating portals. This requires not only strength, but also knowledge. But this was not a developed city, but in fact a field. Without metal, without blueprints, without technology, What's even stranger is that in the 20th century, Stonehenge was reconstructed. Some stones were put back in place using cranes. It turns out that we are still not sure which stones were in their places and which have already been moved. This adds even more fog to an already confusing story. A child buried like a chief. Archaeologists have discovered a burial site in a cave in Thailand that is almost 30,000 years old. The remains are about 4 years old. At first glance, nothing unusual. Child burials do occur, but this is what raised many questions. The child's body was placed in a cavity carved directly into the rock. Carefully, almost like a cradle, the face and chest were covered with red ochre, a pigment that in many ancient cultures was associated with blood, birth, and the transition between worlds. There were objects lying nearby, stone chisels, shells, jewelry. This is not just a random set. This is inventory that is most often found in the burials of leaders, shamans, or people with a special status, and certainly not in the burial of a child. Scientists did not find any traces of a mass grave or a settlement in the cave. Only one burial ground, one child, and an entire ritual assembled around him. This made me wonder, who was he? Why was he buried like this? There is a theory that it was a manifestation of an early religious tradition, or a sign that children in that society were not perceived as weak and helpless, but as bearers of something important. But there is another thought. Maybe he was the only child in the group, or he died in a special way, in his sleep, in a ritual, during a ceremony, and then his death gained weight. Not because he was a leader, but because he became a symbol. In any case, this burial ground is not just archaeology, it is one of the oldest reminders that death, even the earliest, could be a reason for a ritual, and a complex, thoughtful ritual, with details that have survived to this day. Mysterious petroglyphs of Dayton Rock. On the banks of the Taunton River in Massachusetts, there is a small museum with a single but very unusual exhibit, a 40-ton rock taken out of the water and installed here in 1963. This stone, known as Dayton Rock, has long puzzled researchers with its mysterious inscriptions, the origin of which has remained a mystery for several centuries. The height of the rock is about 1.5 meters, the length is 3.5 meters, and the width is 3 meters. Its surface, covered with petroglyphs, was once inclined toward the water and probably served as a kind of message to sailors. The symbols engraved on the stone are straight lines, geometric figures, primitive images of people, and strange writing. The first written mention of the Dayton Rock dates back to 1680. English colonist John Danforth sketched the symbols, and 10 years later Reverend Cotton Mather described them in his book, calling them strange signs left by unknown ancient peoples. The rock gave rise to many hypotheses. In 1837, Danish explorer Carl Christian Raffin claimed that the inscriptions were made by Vikings and were related to the journey of Thorfinn Karlsefni, who, according to Scandinavian sagas, reached the shores of North America in the 11th century. His theory caused a stir, but in 1916, Professor Edmund Delabarre from Brown University proved that Raffin had faked the images, drawing in lines to support his hypothesis. Delabarre himself proposed a new version. He saw the name Miguel Cortereal and the date 1511 in the inscriptions. In his opinion, this message was left by a Portuguese explorer who went missing in America. In 1502, Cortereal set out to find his brother, who had been lost off the coast of Newfoundland, but he himself disappeared. He may have been forced to stay among the Indians, and 9 years later he carved a message about his fate on the rock. Delabarre's theory found support in Portugal but was received with caution in the world. Some believe that the authors of the inscriptions were the ancient Phoenicians, while others talk about the Chinese who reached America long before Columbus. Despite centuries of research, the Dayton Rock remains one of the most mysterious archaeological finds in the United States, continuing to inspire researchers to find its true history. Hussar armor in Poland. Hussars, light cavalry that originated in medieval Hungary, played a key role in numerous historical battles. They were used by the Habsburgs to defend against the Ottomans and participate in European conflicts. The Polish Hussars became especially famous, participating in such battles as the Battle of Orsha in 1514 and the Siege of Vienna in 1683. Recently, in the Polish village of Mikulowice, local resident Patrick Chmielewski, using a metal detector, discovered partially preserved Hussar armor. The find includes several elements: elbow pads, shoulder pads, collarbone protection, and a helmet. The armor was found at a depth of 60 centimeters, and experts believe it dates back to the early 17th century. It is interesting that the armor found is devoid of decorative elements, which is typical for military equipment ordered not by magnates, but by more modest nobles. This indicates that the armor was made in a local workshop to the individual order of a wealthy owner. The Tsar's gold. By the beginning of the 20th century, the Russian Empire owned the largest gold reserves in the world, more than 1,300 tons, in bars, coins, state vaults, and the imperial treasury. After the revolution, all of this disappeared, literally, from the hands of the Romanovs into nowhere. What happened to this gold? Part of the treasure, as they say, fell into the hands of Kolchak, an admiral of the White Army. He took the gold in trains across Siberia to use it to fight the Bolsheviks. But then complete confusion begins. One train was cut off by the Reds, another was stopped by the Japanese, a third was plundered by the Czechoslovaks, a fourth, it is not clear at all whether it existed. Some amounts ended up in banks in Japan, China, France, but not all. A huge part, hundreds of tons, disappeared. According to one version, the gold was hidden in the Siberian ridges and still lies somewhere in the taiga. Another version says that it was taken abroad via Vladivostok and secretly sold. A third version says that the gold simply dissolved in the chaos of the Civil War, partly stolen, partly destroyed, partly disappeared in shadow operations. It is interesting that since then, new information has regularly appeared in Russia. Someone found a map or an eyewitness testimony, or a secret hiding place was allegedly opened. But there has been no official confirmation. The Tsar's gold has become a national ghost. It amazes me how billions simply disappear, literally, without a trace, and not in antiquity, but just 100 years ago. We know who sat on the throne, what he ate for breakfast, what decrees he signed, but we don't know where the metal that held the empire together lies. Lucky amulet. Sometimes archaeology finds not an artifact but a character. For example, recently in Britain, at the site of an ancient settlement from the Roman Empire, archaeologists pulled a bronze figurine out of the ground. Small, rough, almost primitive, it looks like just a piece of metal, but the shape is immediately recognizable. It's a phallus, the most common Roman amulet. And if today it causes laughter, then in ancient times it was considered one of the most powerful protections. Such pendants were worn around the neck, attached to belts, screwed to strollers, even hung over children's beds. The phallus was not vulgarity, it was a talisman, a symbol of strength, life, luck, protection from the evil eye and everything bad. The find is small. No gold, no carvings, no inscriptions, just bronze, worn away by time. But this is also strength, because the amulet was clearly used. It was worn, fiddled with in the hand. Maybe they lost it. Maybe it belonged to a soldier, or a merchant, or a child. Someone believed that this little thing would hold back trouble, and now, 2,000 years later, it's back in the light. Didn't work. Who knows? It outlived its owner, its empire, its era, everything but its shape. A piece of cake. On February 10, 1840, Queen Victoria married Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg in Gotha. At their wedding, an impressive cake weighing about 136 kilograms was served. The three-tiered treat was decorated with miniature figurines of the bride and groom in Roman attire, as well as an exquisite retinue made of refined sugar, which was then a truly luxurious and rare product. The inside of the cake was generously soaked in alcohol and filled with lemon, elderberry, sugar, and dried fruit. However, there was a problem. Victoria was on a diet, and the guests, it seemed, were not so hungry as to overcome a cake weighing more than 100 weight. Therefore, at the end of the celebration, the Queen ordered that the cake be cut into small pieces, which were then placed in tin boxes and distributed to friends, family, and other honored guests. Thus began the tradition of giving guests pieces of the wedding cake, a tradition that even at the royal court took the form of a keepsake. Many owners of these souvenirs decided not to eat them because they were a valuable gift from the Queen herself. Some slices remained untouched and have survived to this day. Today, pieces of Victoria's wedding cake are true relics. Several of them are in the Royal Trust collection, and one such piece was sold at auction in 2016 for £1,500. If this seems like an impressive sum, it is worth noting that in 1998, part of the wedding cake of King Edward VIII and Wallis Simpson, dated 1937, was sold at Sotheby's for $29900. But surprisingly, Victoria's wedding cake is still edible thanks to its high alcohol content. Theoretically, it could be tried today, although it would most likely remain just a legend. Two 2,500-year-old Olmec reliefs. The Olmecs are the oldest civilization in Mesoamerica. To be precise, this is the oldest civilization that we know about. And to be even more precise, we know very little about them. The heyday of their civilization was from about 1600 to 400 BC. They lived along the Gulf of Mexico, where the states of Tabasco and Veracruz are now located. Archaeologists themselves do not even know how this people called themselves, so the word Olmec is the Nahuatl word, Aztec language, and means rubber people. This people had ritual bloodletting. They loved to play with a ball and drank chocolate. And also, they were the ancestors of the Maya, about which the scientific world knows much more. And the Olmecs carved giant stone heads from volcanic rocks. This became their hallmark. All buildings discovered by archaeologists were deliberately destroyed. That is, more than 2,000 years ago, someone deliberately tried to wipe out a whole people with all the buildings from the face of the earth. Recently, archaeologists have discovered Olmec reliefs that were made of limestone. They were about 1.5 meters in diameter and weighed 700 kilograms. Stone reliefs have been found in the municipality of Tennessee in Tabasco in southeastern Mexico. It is assumed that the local Olmec rulers are depicted on the reliefs during the performance of ritual ceremonies. Perhaps these people are in a position that reduces the flow of blood and oxygen to the brain, which causes a trance-like state. From the stone heads of the rulers of Mesoamerica, we will move to Africa, where a pink stone sarcophagus awaits us. The death of Alexander. Alexander the Great conquered half the world by the age of 30. His army marched from Greece to India. He never lost a single battle. He destroyed empires and created new ones. But in 323 BC, in the prime of his life, he suddenly died in Babylon. He was only 32 years old. What happened? There are many versions. The Persians said it was punishment for desecrating the tomb of King Cyrus. The Macedonians said that he simply overstrained himself. Drunkenness, illness, overwork. Roman historians believe that he was poisoned. There is a version that it was malaria or West Nile fever, or an autoimmune disease, or a slow-acting poison delivered from the east. But the most questions are not raised by the cause of death, but by what happened after. Where is his body? According to one version, the sarcophagus was taken to Egypt. According to another, it never arrived. Then the trail is lost. No tomb, no inscription, no official burial. For the ancient world, this is an almost impossible absurdity. Such a person should have been deified, but instead, silence. Some suggest that the body was hidden on purpose, to avoid fueling a cult, to prevent legitimacy for the heirs, or because his death was part of a conspiracy and someone wanted to remove all traces. Sometimes the worst secrets are not how a person lived, but how he died. Alexander was left with fame, cities with his name, and a myth. But there was no period, no cross, no mausoleum, only guesses. And this makes his death even more legendary and disturbing. Mosaics on the Sea of Galilee. And we will return to Israel again, where archaeologists have discovered floor mosaics on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. This indicates that this place was a prosperous region in ancient times, inhabited by early Christian Jewish communities, and later it became an important Islamic administrative center. Once this place was an important trade center centered around the production of sugar, and the son of the caliph ordered the palace, which included one of the first mosques erected in the Palestine area. The area was hit by a massive earthquake around 749 AD and was later abandoned. Professor Kunin and his team have been conducting archaeological research in the area for the past decade, starting with excavations and restoration work at the Caliph's palace. Work was suspended during the pandemic, but this year the team continued excavation at the site. Meteorites help win the lottery. In 2015, a bright meteor flew over Kanchanaburi, Thailand, lighting up the sky with green and orange flashes. Since then, there have been rumors that its debris has scattered around the area. In fact, meteors have visited Thailand more than once in recent years, leaving people with black stones that are believed to have magical powers. The most famous story comes from Fatalung province. A married couple from Sirapuadon discovered strange boulders weighing up to 20 kilograms in a palm plantation. At night, lightning struck the garden, and in the morning the couple saw burning holes with mysterious fragments in them. Having taken the gift from heaven home, they soon felt a surge of energy and noticed that they began to quarrel less. Interested neighbors noticed unusual patterns on the surface of the stones, mistaking them for lucky numbers for the lottery. This is a popular hobby in Thailand. Although there was no big win, the belief in special properties only grew stronger. Now, people often come to the owners to charge themselves with cosmic energy, and some are thinking about making money on such relics. This cult of heavenly stones shows how a natural phenomenon can turn into a mystical one, reflecting a craving for miracles and a desire to join the secrets of space. The miner's little guardian. Until the end of the 20th century, miners did not go underground alone. They had a canary with them, in a cage or on their shoulder. Not as a talisman, but as a signal. The bird sensed dangerous gas before a person. When it stopped singing, started to rush about, or lost consciousness, it meant it was time to go up immediately. Sometimes people had no other warning. In Britain, these birds were officially used until 1986. In other countries, longer. It was a simple but reliable way to survive, and it became firmly entrenched in miner culture, a small living creature that falls silent first, and thus saves others. King Arthur, a myth on the throne. They have been writing about him since the 12th century. They make films about him, write novels, draw comics. King Arthur is an almost mythological figure. The Round Table, the Sword in the Stone, Merlin, Camelot. But behind all these legends, there remains the main question. Was he real? Historians are still arguing. Some believe that Arthur is a collective image, the leader of the Celtic resistance to the Anglo-Saxons, about whom a heroic epic was composed centuries later. Others are sure that he is a completely fictional character, a literary construct. The problem is that sources about him appear too late. The first mentions are 300 to 400 years after the supposed era of his life. There are versions that the prototype of Arthur was a Roman military leader who remained in Britain after the legions left. Someone points to a possible connection with a leader named Ambrosius Aurelianus, but there is no direct evidence. No grave, no chronicles, no reliable descriptions of contemporaries. What's interesting is something else. In the legends about Arthur, almost everything is about morality, about duty, honor, truth, the fight for justice. This is not just a king, this is an idea of what a king should be. Perhaps that is why the image of Arthur is so tenacious, because it is not about a specific person, but about what we all lack. Tutankhamun of Kazakhstan. In 1969, a burial site of a man in golden armor was found in Kazakhstan, which became a symbol of the country. Scientists, carried away by 4,000 artifacts, forgot about the remains themselves. The golden armor of a warrior from the 5th century BC, known as the Golden Man, became a symbol of Kazakhstan's independence. It was found in a tomb of the Saka tribe near the settlement of Issyk, 60 kilometers east of Almaty. During excavations, archaeologists discovered remains with gold-decorated armor and many other valuable artifacts. The burial, found by a farmer preparing the land for sowing, remained untouched despite the looting of the main tomb. In a sarcophagus made of spruce logs lay a skeleton decorated with 4,000 gold ornaments. This discovery amazed scientists so much that the human remains initially received less attention. The Golden Man, dubbed the Kazakhstan Tutankhamun, is thought to be an 18-year-old Saka warrior wearing a costume made up of thousands of gold ornaments, including a shirt, boots, and headdress. The costume features animal motifs and a 70 centimeter tall headdress with arrows, snow leopards, and mythical creatures. Archaeologist Janine Davis Kimball has suggested that the remains may be those of a female priestess, citing artifacts found nearby such as a mirror and necklace. In her book, Warrior Women, she theorizes that the Golden Man may have been a woman. The poor condition of the bones after 50 years of exposure to bacteria and viruses makes analysis difficult, but the possibility that the Golden Man was a woman remains open. Regardless of gender, the craftsmanship of the costume is astounding. Artifacts that shouldn't be here. In the south of Israel, archaeologists have excavated a site that it would seem shouldn't stand out in any way. But everything changed when they began to study the objects found. The ground contained clay vessels and bronze objects, the style of which does not coincide with the local cultural tradition. Ornaments, shapes, even the composition of the alloys. All this was more reminiscent of objects found earlier in other regions of the Middle East and even further. There was no temple or permanent settlement nearby. Only fragments that seem to have been brought here on purpose. It seems that this place was used for rituals or temporary gatherings, perhaps by nomadic tribes that had ties to distant cultures. Officially, the objects are considered atypical for the region, but questions remain. Who brought them? Why? And why here? So far, these are only hypotheses, but the find itself stands out from the usual picture of the history of the desert. Cave of the time of Ramesses II. It rarely happens when archaeologists manage to touch places that have not been touched for thousands of years. This time in the Palmashim National Park in Israel, a group of researchers discovered an ancient burial. While working, the excavator collapsed the roof of the burial cave, inside which dozens of artifacts from the time of Pharaoh Ramses II were found. The last time there were people 3,300 years ago. Archaeologists have found dozens of fragments of pottery and bronze utensils, jugs and bowls of various shapes. Some vessels contain precious substances. In addition to dishes, they managed to find weapons of war in the form of spears and arrowheads. All this was to serve the dead in the afterlife. According to archaeologists, such a find happens once in a lifetime. These are not Indiana Jones movies. This is real life, a real tomb straight from the ancient world. It's a time capsule. These vessels and weapons have not been touched by human hands for more than 3,300 years. Usually, warriors were buried with weapons in those days. The burial chamber was manually carved into the rock in the shape of a square. Perhaps it was the burial place of an entire family or clan. Unfortunately, the preservation of the remains was so terrible that it would not even be possible for scientists to extract DNA for analysis. But scientists will be able to explore the ancient cosmetics and women's panties that were discovered in London. Where did the Mayans disappear to? The Mayans left behind incredible things. Cities carved out of the jungle, temples resembling stepped pyramids, complex writing, and precise astronomical calculations. Their calendars were so accurate that they are still debated. But by the time the Spaniards arrived, only small settlements in the forest remained of the great civilization. No army, no power, no temples. What happened? Scientists have put forward dozens of versions. The most common is an ecological catastrophe. The Mayans cut down too much forest, the soil became depleted, and a drought began. Combined with overpopulation and internal conflicts, this could have led to collapse. There is also a theory of epidemics. Some talk about internecine wars between city-states. Even an alien trace is mentioned in conspiracy circles. The disappearance of an entire culture seems so strange. But what is especially important, the Mayans did not disappear completely. The descendants of this civilization still live in Guatemala, Mexico, Belize. They speak Mayan languages, preserve traditions, customs, costumes. It's just that the state model that we call the Mayan civilization collapsed. And it collapsed suddenly. The cities were empty, power disappeared, writing was forgotten over time. When you look at their stone cities covered in moss, you get the feeling that all this happened very recently, as if they went deep into the jungle and will return someday. Not as a tribe, but as a culture that again has something to say to the world. Jar of cream and worn women's panties. In Tabard Square in London, archaeologists have found an eye-catching set of artifacts. A jar of cream and women's panties lay at the bottom of the ditch. It would seem nothing unusual. After all, any girl could drop this from her handbag. But the girl dropped this set not yesterday, not last year, and not even 100 years ago. These artifacts are over 2,000 years old. In 120 to 150 AD, this place was a small ancient Roman town, Londonium. And now this place is a huge modern metropolis. Archaeologists immediately opened the jar and saw in it a white cream with a fingerprint, as if this cream had been used yesterday. After analyzing the contents, it was possible to find out the composition. It was animal fat, starch, and tin, and there are no smells of lavender or chocolate. 2,000 years ago, a similar cream was used as a moisturizer for the skin of the face and hands. It is very interesting what brand of cosmetics the ancient Roman lady used at that time. But the second find is even more interesting. These are women's panties, which are very similar to modern bikinis or thongs. It's hard to believe that more than 2,000 years ago, ladies preferred such underwear. This set was found in 1953 at the bottom of an ancient well. As I said earlier, their age is 1st AD. Most likely, one of you is very familiar with the history of ancient Rome and knows very well that in those days no one wore underwear. And he will be right. Such underwear was not used for every day. In it, the girls performed various gymnastic exercises. This is confirmed by the mosaic at the Villa Romana del Casale in Sicily, 4th century AD. To perform complex acrobatic stunts, the girls needed at least minimal clothing. In addition to performances, women in ancient Rome used such panties in a special period, putting pieces of folded fabric or wool inside. Here is another example of the ancient Roman mosaic Fight of the Gladiators from the Villa Borghese, Rome, 3rd century AD. Have you ever wondered what sounds were in Rome on the battlefield? Ancient octopus baits. 3,500 years ago in the Marianas, people loved to eat octopuses. And to catch these amazing creatures, they used small cut and drilled pieces of cowrie shells. This is a type of sea snail that octopuses really like. The shells were fastened with a small stone sinker with grooves. This tradition originated here 3,500 years ago and lasted until about 1000 AD. Similar finds have been found on other Pacific islands. This suggests that ancient people shared their knowledge of fishing and hunting among themselves, even though they were separated by hundreds and thousands of kilometers. At the moment, it is these octopus baits that are considered the most ancient on the planet. This tells us that this type of food resource was important enough for them that they invented something very special to catch octopuses. It is difficult to say what made up the bulk of their diet, but if we take another experience in archaeology, we can say that for the ancient people of the Mariana Islands, octopuses were considered traditional food. If everything is clear with seafood, then it is completely incomprehensible what kind of strange pits were found in Peru. Road underwater. When diving in the Hawaiian Islands, you expect to find many things: lava, craters, rare corals, but not a road, and certainly not like this. At the depths near an underwater volcano, divers noticed a strange area. Perfectly straight stone slabs, yellow in color, laid out in a row. The surface is like a sidewalk. The structure is like masonry. The angles between the slabs are too precise to be random. All this did not look like a geological formation, but like a trace of something artificial. The video quickly spread across the internet. The comments are standard: Atlantis, ancient path, aliens. But the researchers themselves were puzzled. They did not find signs of human intervention in the area, but they could not immediately explain its origin. Later, geologists got involved. According to their version, this is the result of volcanic activity. Basaltic lava quickly cooled and cracked under the pressure of water, created polygonal faults. The structure we perceive as a road is actually a natural formation, but the way it looks is confusing because it's too recognizable. We're used to nature creating chaos, and here there's order. You look at these slabs and can't shake the feeling that someone has already been here. Not you first, not the fish. Someone. Maybe it's just an optical illusion or an effect of shapes, but there's a line where science gives an answer, and you still continue to doubt. Where was the cradle of the Indo-Europeans? We speak Indo-European languages. Most of the languages of Europe, Iran, and India are one huge family. They have a common root, but where did it come from? Where was that starting point? The cradle from which the ancestors of the Slavs, Celts, Greeks, Hindus, and Germans then diverged. For a long time, it was believed that everything began in India, hence the term Indo-European. But later, scientists realized that there were too few language branches in India. But in the steppes of Eastern Europe, on the contrary, there was linguistic diversity. This is called the law of the center of distribution. The closer to the source, the more options. Today, one of the most recognized theories is the steppe hypothesis. According to it, the Indo-Europeans appeared about 4,500 years ago in the south of Russia and Ukraine, in the area of the Yamnaya culture. They were nomads who knew how to tame horses, used carts, and owned metal. They spread west to Europe and east to Asia, bringing with them not only words, but also culture, technology, and customs. And yet, despite archaeology, linguistics, and genetics, we don't have a single answer. There's the Anatolian hypothesis that the original homeland was in Asia Minor. There's the Iranian theory. There's even an idea that it all started in the Balkans. What gets me about this topic is how easily we lose the threads of origin. We know where the iPhone came from, but we don't know where the word mother came from. We can describe the process of 19th century colonization in detail, but we can't say for sure where the words that billions of people speak today came from. Maybe the question isn't where exactly that cradle was, but why we lost it, and why we're still trying to find ourselves in language. Mysterious photos. This photo raises many questions and controversies. It shows two mysterious figures, and some consider them proof of the existence of alien beings. On the left is a tiny creature with thin limbs, a large head, and characteristic almond-shaped eyes. Its skin has a strange color, as if covered with an iridescent film. On the right is another figure, preserved in a vessel with liquid, reminiscent of exhibits that can be found in scientific laboratories or anatomy museums. Such finds are often associated with conspiracy theories about UFO crashes, secret laboratories, and experiments. Some claim that these are proof of extraterrestrial life, while skeptics consider them skillfully made dummies or anatomical models. Are these artifacts real or just skillfully faked? The question remains open. But one thing is for sure, such images fuel interest in the mystery of extraterrestrial intelligence and make us wonder, what if we are not alone in the universe? The Witch, the Dwarf, and the Magician's Pyramid. The ancient Mayan city of Uxmal, located on the Yucatan Peninsula, is a place where unique architecture and ancient mythology merge with otherworldly landscapes. One of the most mysterious structures here is the Pyramid of the Magician, a structure amazing in its shape and significance. This place is surrounded by magical legends, in particular the story of a dwarf and a witch who supposedly built the magician's pyramid. This legend exists only in oral retellings of local residents, since it is not recorded in ancient texts. Variations of this story are passed down from generation to generation. The story was first recorded in the 19th century by John Lloyd Stephens, an American explorer who published his observations in a book about his travels to the Yucatan. One day he heard this story from a local resident. According to legend, in the place where the pyramid now stands, there was once the hut of an old witch who wanted to have an heir. Using magic, she created a childlike creature from the egg. This baby quickly grew to the size of an adult, but remained the size of a dwarf. The witch was proud of him and dreamed that he would become a great ruler. On her instructions, the dwarf challenged the local king to a duel. The test proposed by the king seemed impossible, but each time the dwarf coped with them using the cunning and magic of his mother. For example, the king demanded that the dwarf build a house taller than all the buildings in the city in one night. By morning, a majestic pyramid rose on the site of the old hut. The final test was that the king and the dwarf had to break wood over each other's heads. The witch prepared her son by placing a protective spell on his head. The king was unable to harm the dwarf, and he in turn took the king's life with his blow. So the dwarf became the new ruler of Uxmal. In some versions of this legend, the dwarf is the god Itzamama, who used magic to build the pyramid. These stories may have emerged as an attempt to explain the unusual shape and structure of the Pyramid of the Magician, which archaeologists believe took 3 centuries to build. Treasure on a walk. In Britain, a man went for a walk with a metal detector, just to look at a field where some Roman things had been found before. He expected to find fragments at most, but instead he found one of the largest hoards of coins in recent years, almost 1,500 bronze coins from the time of Roman Britain, 3rd to 4th centuries AD. Many have portraits of emperors, inscriptions, symbols. The condition is surprisingly good. Almost all are clean, not burnt, without signs of destruction. They lay in the ground as if they had been put there yesterday. What is interesting is that there was no building or burial signs nearby. The coins were simply in the ground, as if someone had put them away for later and never returned. The man acted according to the rules. He reported the find, called archaeologists. The hoard was documented, handed over to the museum. He received payment, but the main thing here is not the money. The main thing is how thin the line is between everyday life and history. Sometimes it is enough to simply walk across a field to pull out of the ground something that has been silent for centuries. Who were the Sumerians? We are used to thinking that history begins with Egypt, but if we look deeper, it turns out that the first great civilization was not the Egyptians at all, but the Sumerians. They were the ones who built the first cities, created the first writing, made complex calculations, studied astronomy, medicine, irrigation, and even drew up laws. They seem to be from another time, but who they were still remains a mystery. The Sumerians appeared in southern Mesopotamia around the 4th millennium BC and immediately as a highly organized society. There are no traces of their gradual development, as if they came with ready-made knowledge. They had a complex language that was unlike any other. Even family ties with other languages of the world have not been found. Hence the question, where are they from? There are versions that the Sumerians came from the east, perhaps from the mountainous regions of Iran or Pakistan. In their language, the words country and mountain are denoted by the same thing. This may be a hint, but there are also more exotic theories. For example, that the Sumerians brought their knowledge from a sunken continent or were contactees with extraterrestrial beings. Of course, there is no evidence for these versions, but the oddities remain. What personally surprises me is the amount of knowledge they possessed. They didn't just build houses, they knew how to strengthen the foundation. They didn't just write, they kept accounts. They didn't just observe the stars, they predicted lunar eclipses. They were rational, civilized, and yet they disappeared. At some point, the Sumerians dissolved into other peoples. Their language disappeared, and all that remained were cuneiform tablets and scattered guesses. Why this road was flooded. On the coast of Israel, archaeologists have found an unusual road that was flooded many years ago. This section, which was recently explored, was part of an ancient trade route used in ancient times. The road passed through several settlements and led to a port, but for some reason it was flooded. The mystery of this road is that its surfaces are much better preserved than one would expect from an object several thousand years old. The stone slabs that were used for paving are almost undamaged, which makes scientists wonder about the technology used in its construction. However, the mystery that puzzles is that no one knows exactly why the road was flooded. Some suggest that it was the result of an earthquake. Others, that the water could have gotten in due to changes in the climate or the sea. All this remains an open question, and research continues. Sounds of a Roman battlefield. The mouthpiece of an ancient Roman horn was found in the ancient Roman fort of Vindolanda. The metal horn was a musical instrument used to convey orders to troops during combat. No fewer than 9 Roman forts were built of wood or stone in Vindolanda from about AD 85 to 370, creating one of the most complex archaeological sites in Britain and a unique cultural heritage of frontier life. Today, Vindolanda is an active archaeological site where excavations have previously unearthed thousands of perfectly preserved shoes, textiles, woodwork, and Vindolanda tablets, the oldest surviving documents in Britain dating from the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. Researchers were excavating the floor of Hadrian's workshop, buried under the remains of a scola, officers' club, when they discovered a rare copper alloy mouthpiece dating from around 120 to 128 AD. Barbara Burley, curator at the Vindolanda Trust, said, "When you find a piece of a musical instrument, it helps us get a better idea of not only what the army looked like, but how it sounded. And now we will go to China and see what the funeral suits looked like." Silver Valkyrie. In the Danish village of Herby, during a routine archaeological survey, a figurine was found. Small, only 3.5 centimeters, made of silver. But it is immediately obvious that it is not accidental. A woman with a sword. In one hand is a round shield, the other is extended downwards. A dress with thin folds, hair pulled into a bun. The face is concentrated. Not a deity, not a decoration, not a toy. She is armed. The find dates back to about 800, and it is the first of its kind found in Scandinavia. Scientists initially decided that this was a mythical Valkyrie, a messenger of the gods, but then other versions began to appear. Maybe this is not a spirit at all, but a person. Viking sagas mention women who fought. They were skalds, warriors, seers. Some burials with weapons actually belonged to women, which is confirmed by DNA analysis. The figurine could have been part of a ritual staff, or a personal talisman, or a picture of a specific woman, one who was respected and feared. In any case, the image of a strong, armed woman in the Viking Age is not fiction. It is reality, simply hidden for a long time under layers of convenient ideas. She says nothing, but her pose, her shield, her sword, they have already said everything. Sometimes it seems like all of this is just facts. Bones, stones, buildings, chemical formulas in the atmosphere of a distant planet. But the longer you watch, the more clearly you understand all of this is about us, about fear, about memory, about loneliness, about what we hide. Archaeology does not tell us what history was. It shows that it was there at all, and each layer has its own face. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Bye, everyone.